In the dead of night, a man stealthily broke into the church, seemingly searching for something, unaware that someone was silently watching his every move. When the pastor returned, the unusual barking of dogs led him to a horrifying sight: a lifeless body lying in a pool of blood, its eyes wide open. No one knew what had happened to the man, nor the killer. But from that death, secrets thought to have been buried for 44 years began to surface. The police quickly sealed off the scene. Through Daniel's testimony, the victim was identified as Anthony, Bernard's younger cousin. The last time Daniel saw Anthony was at a service Bernard had organized that afternoon. Anthony had shared local history, particularly about a secret army that had once been stationed there. On the surface, they appeared to be ordinary citizens, but, in reality, they had secretly fought against the German army. He collected the weapons they had left behind to display, while continuing his search for their hiding place. While everyone was excitedly discussing the matter, Bernard had someone summon Anthony to his office. No one knew exactly what had happened, but the sound of a heated argument suggested a conflict between the two. Daniel proactively accompanied Neil to the mansion, believing that the presence of someone familiar to the villagers would help calm them down. There, Bernard and his daughter, Honor, explained that Anthony had lived in London and was an alcoholic. He also frequently caused trouble. Bernard then brought him back to the village to rehab. Anthony was housed in a small room in the mansion and tasked with researching the place's history during World War II. When asked when he last saw Anthony, Bernard deliberately lied, claiming it was that morning. He explained that the afternoon had been a brief meeting to discuss finances. However, this testimony aroused suspicion in Daniel and Neil. After returning to Daniel's house, the two analyzed the case together. The church was completely dark when the murder occurred. The direction of the blood splatter indicated the killer attacked the victim from behind. Therefore, he likely didn't see the killer's face. The terrifying thing was that the killer seemed to know for sure that he would be at the church at night. The only person who regularly came there to pray every night was Daniel. Thinking about this, they guessed that Anthony was probably just a victim of mistaken identity. The real target of the killer was Daniel. He immediately retrieved the crumpled letters from the trash can. These were the threatening letters he had received over the past few days. That night, he sat thoughtfully at his desk. Soft music played, helping him calm down. His dog ran up to him again, whimpering as if wanting to lead him somewhere. As he followed it into the living room, the music became distorted. On the sofa appeared a person who should have been dead. Fortunately, it was all just a nightmare. The next morning, reporters and media crowded the front door to investigate the case. Daniel refused to reveal anything and repeatedly told his mother not to talk to outsiders. Neil continued to ask Daniel for help in the investigation because he had close ties to the villagers. When they searched Anthony's former residence, they found a manuscript with the MGM designation. However, they didn't know its meaning. Anthony also kept many photographs, including one of the mansion's servants. Dora and Keith were standing at the far end. They had worked for the Bernard family since World War II, even being transferred to the Ministry of Defense. They still lived in the village today. Bernard recounted that when he and Anthony were children, they had witnessed a horrific tragedy. A special operations executive had just boarded a plane when a massive explosion occurred. The investigation at the time concluded the cause was a technical malfunction and no one survived. Neil questioned the other villagers one by one. Dora had cancer and Keith was always by her side, caring for her. As Dora's condition worsened, the two decided to find a quiet place to recuperate. Dora wanted to go to the lavender fields of Provence, a place Keith had always dreamed of visiting. They said Anthony was a fairly decent man. However, they were not close enough to provide any valuable clues. The next person was Stella, the owner of a clothing store. She wanted to build a greenhouse in the church, but the location coincided with where Daniel planned to build a restroom. Therefore, they constantly argued. She wasn't particularly concerned about Anthony's death. She was only curious to see if the case would disrupt his plans. Mrs. Bernard suggested Neil meet with the gardener, Edgie, who was said to have had a bad relationship with Anthony. On the way to Edgie's house, Daniel mentioned that Edgie had once been a boxer. After the war, he had worked as a debt collector and was known for his ruthless methods, even resorting to violence to force people into submission. Edgie denied all suspicion and said the last time he saw Anthony was on the morning of the festival. When Neil reminded him that Mrs. Bernard had said they had met in the afternoon, he became annoyed and said he couldn't remember. Daniel quickly intervened to mediate, but this displeased Neil, who preferred to pressure suspects into panicking and revealing the truth. Daniel, on the other hand, believed the villagers trusted him and would willingly reveal their secrets. They didn't need to resort to underhanded tactics. Dora and Keith said they were about to leave the village for Provence. Daniel was genuinely happy for them, knowing they had relied on each other for many years. Meanwhile, Stella, sitting in the pub, looked annoyed. Later, Daniel met a couple, Ned and Jane, and confirmed that they would not reveal the details of the murder that had occurred occurred the previous day. Ned returned home with his wife in a furious mood. Previously, his wife was rumored to have had an affair with Anthony. After the affair was discovered, she promised not to see Anthony again. If Stella hadn't been so nosy and revealed it, Ned probably wouldn't have known about it. During the investigation, the police discovered Edgie had a long criminal record related to serious assault dating back to the 1950s. They also checked Anthony's call history and found that someone had called him 5 times the day before. The caller was Ned. Daniel coincidentally met Alex, Bernard's son, at the pub. He recalled seeing Anthony arguing with Alex on the afternoon of the festival. However, Alex only explained that Anthony and Bernard had argued so fiercely that Anthony had taken his anger out on him. Suspiciously, Bernard didn't mention this argument at all in his testimony. Why would he deliberately hide it? On the way home, Daniel found a dead rat hanging on his door. Another threatening letter was pinned to it. The next morning, when he went to the shop, he noticed the villagers' strange stares. It turned out that the latest newspaper had published a sensational article about the murder at his church, mentioning his support for the gay community. He immediately thought his mother had revealed it. She, however, thought his support for the gay community was already well known, so there was nothing to hide. He gave the threatening letter to Neil. Neil was about to go to the newspaper office to question Ned, so he went along. At the office, Ned explained that Anthony had frequently come there to look for historical documents, but he always relied on Bernard's influence to avoid paying. Out of anger, Ned had blacklisted Anthony. A few days earlier, Anthony had even stormed into the office and caused trouble. The 5 calls Ned made were only to warn Anthony not to return. Ned was also writing a novel about a captain who had joined the Special Operations Bureau during World War II, but was actually a double agent for Germany. This person apparently fled before his identity was revealed and has not been found to this day. Keith also just arrived at the newsroom to help reporters find information about this captain. While observing the newsroom, Daniel unexpectedly saw the MGM seal in the printing room. This symbol was identical to the one he had found in Anthony's room. It turned out that MGM was the name of a high-end art gallery in town. The gallery owner said that Anthony regularly sold paintings to him. Just last week, Anthony had sold a famous painting by Louis Léon Loire. After verification, the painting was confirmed to be authentic. However, about 6 months ago, Anthony suddenly became very aggressive about money. The gallery owner initially thought he had just become more greedy and didn't think much of it. Back at the police station, Neil gave Daniel a notebook found on Anthony's body. No one understood the entries inside. Therefore, the task of deciphering it was assigned to Daniel. The autopsy results showed that there was plant tissue on Anthony's body. The crime scene was near where Stella planned to build a greenhouse. A set of gardening tools was also there. Notably, the pruning shears were missing from the crime scene photos. Police suspected this was the murder weapon. If the killer had planned it beforehand, they should have prepared the weapon themselves. This led them to believe the murder was a spontaneous outburst. When Daniel returned home, Bishop approached him and sternly reminded him about his public advocacy for homosexuals. He had even personally visited AIDS patients. In the social context of the time, this was a very sensitive issue and could turn many people against him. Daniel understood this as a warning and could only promise to be more careful. He then continued reading Anthony's notebook. At the bottom of a page was a mysterious location. Daniel went to ask Bernard and discovered that besides Anthony's usual room, the mansion also had a private research room belonging to him. Inside, there was a map of the church. Bernard also found a childhood photograph of himself riding a horse with Anthony standing beside him. Before leaving, Daniel saw a painting hanging in the hallway. He immediately recognized it as identical to one he had seen at the art gallery. The 2 paintings were unbelievably similar. Finally, Bernard was forced to confess the truth. Anthony was an exceptionally skilled copyist. He had taken genuine paintings from the mansion, sold them, then made a fake copy and put it back in its place. Bernard only discovered this after someone warned him that one of the paintings in the mansion was a fake. The argument between the two during the festival actually stemmed from this. Because it was a family scandal, he didn't want to make it public, so he lied to the police. At dinner, Daniel's mother continued to hint that since he was living a peaceful life, he shouldn't interfere in matters concerning minority groups. He immediately refuted the claim, saying that he himself had previously participated in strikes and fought for workers' rights. That night, in a dark room, Ned took out some photographs. They all showed his wife and Anthony engaging in intimate acts. He silently burned each photograph, anger gradually appearing in his eyes. The next day, Neil came to see Daniel with a new theory. Based on the gallery owner's statement, they wanted to know if anything had happened to Anthony 6 months prior that would suddenly require him to have so much money. Daniel also realized that forging paintings couldn't have been done by just one person. Anthony must have had an accomplice. If they found that person, they could uncover the secret of what happened 6 months earlier. Before Neil left, Daniel remembered a detail that that had almost been overlooked. On the night Anthony was murdered, Stella had cycled past the church, but when questioned, she made no mention of this at all. Daniel's mother overheard the conversation and decided to investigate herself. She went to the clothing store and subtly pressured Stella by mentioning that her family had a good relationship with Neil. If Stella told the truth, she would consider helping Stella avoid being considered a suspect by the police. Finally, Stella admitted that night, while cycling past the church, she saw Edgie secretly following Anthony. Daniel immediately went to the house by the river to find Edgie. At first, he remained stubbornly silent. Only when Daniel reminded him that if caught, this could implicate his nephew did he confess. It turned out that Anthony had asked him to clean the research room. Because he was too busy with work, he refused. Anthony became angry and loudly belittled him. During the festival, Edgie had drunk quite a lot. Thinking about Anthony's attitude, Edgie was angry and intended to follow him to scare him. But then, Edgie saw the police checking the cemetery behind the church. At that point, he sobered up and abandoned the idea, returning home. However, this testimony only made Daniel even more confused. Why did Anthony go to the cemetery to search for ancient graves? Could these graves be connected to the mysterious location mentioned in the notebook? Daniel decided to go to the cemetery behind the church himself. He discovered a special grave known as the Five Towers Burial Ground. It was overgrown with weeds and had been neglected for a long time. He opened a secret compartment next to the tombstone, but only found something resembling a water pipe valve. Just then, Jane arrived and burst into tears, recounting everything. When Anthony was brought back to the village for rehabilitation, she had considered herself his support. During his rehabilitation, he was very vulnerable emotionally, so he gradually saw her as his emotional support. He frequently called her at night, even stalking her to the point of seriously affecting his family. To reassure her husband, she had promised not to contact Anthony anymore, but fearing that Anthony would feel abandoned and continue drinking, their relationship gradually became a secret. She initially thought she could just keep it a secret from her husband, but while cleaning his room, she discovered many rolls of film. The photos inside were all candid shots of her and Anthony, some taken months in advance. Enraged, she rushed to the newspaper office to confront him about his stalking. During the argument, she revealed a suspicious detail. On the night Anthony died, Ned claimed he had a migraine and went to bed early, but in the middle of the night, she woke up and found he wasn't home. Following Daniel's advice, Jane decided to tell the police everything. Ned was immediately taken to the station for questioning. Meanwhile, Daniel participated in a protest in town to speak out in defense of the gay community and AIDS patients. Because the crowd blocked traffic, a conflict arose with passers-by. Daniel tried to intervene, but was ultimately struck with a sign. The police subsequently arrested both him and the troublemakers. At the police station, Neil and his assistant developed the film rolls and discovered a series of intimate photos of Jane and Anthony. Ned had a clear motive and no alibi for the night of the murder. Neil suspected Ned might have murdered Anthony out of jealousy and anger. However, due to insufficient evidence, the police were forced to release him. Afterwards, he bailed out Daniel. The two went to a pub for a drink and talked. Daniel asked when Bernard's family could receive Anthony's body for the funeral, but the case was still unsolved, so Neil couldn't hand over the body. Daniel then went to see Bernard and advised his family to continue waiting. Before leaving the mansion, he looked at the famous painting hanging in the hallway again. This time, he noticed a peculiar detail. The small figure in the painting was wearing a music player. Daniel immediately thought of Alex, who loved music and had a talent for painting. Sure enough, after being questioned, Alex admitted to having helped Anthony copy a Monet painting. From then on, things gradually turned into a fake art ring. After each copy, Anthony would swap the fake paintings with the real ones in the mansion and secretly take the real ones to the art gallery to sell. After a while, Alex started to feel bored, so he deliberately made small details in the copied paintings for entertainment. About 6 months ago, Anthony started pressuring him to paint more, but he couldn't finish quickly. This continued until the festival day, when Bernard discovered a painting had been swapped. Even so, Anthony still forced Alex to continue copying paintings and threatened to tell Bernard the whole truth if he refused. This was the cause of the argument between the two on the festival day. After finishing work and returning home, Daniel discovered that Jane had packed her bags and quietly left. She only said goodbye to him because she wanted to go live with relatives elsewhere. She couldn't accept the possibility that her husband had murdered Anthony. Daniel reminded her that the police hadn't charged Ned yet, meaning he wasn't necessarily the killer. He advised her to ask herself if she still loved her husband and not to make a decision against her conscience. After some thought, she called her husband and wanted them to sit down and talk, but all she received was a cold voicemail. At that moment, a body appeared floating on the surface of the village lake. The next morning, Edgie's nephew, Nathan, discovered the body. He went to the area near the lake to check his hunting traps and happened to see Ned in the water. water. He immediately pulled the body ashore. Daniel received the news and quickly went to the scene with Neil. The cause of Ned's death was the same as Anthony's. His throat was cut. The wound showed that the killer was very skilled with a knife. Because the body had been submerged in water, the exact time of death could not be determined. They could only estimate it was the previous evening. Daniel noticed an old house near the scene. It had been abandoned for a long time, overgrown with weeds. However, inside, there was a mural that was kept spotlessly clean, as if regularly cared for. During World War II, the French army had trained there. The image of the cross in the painting symbolized freedom. Strangely, although the entire painting depicted the chaos and brutality of war, the two people dancing in the center were completely peaceful, immersed in their own world. This image seemed to symbolize the possibility that love could still exist, even in despair. As Daniel and Neil left the house, he suddenly noticed an important detail. The expensive watch that Ned always wore had disappeared. Jane confirmed it was a wedding gift she had given him, and he almost never took it off. Therefore, it was very likely that the killer took it after committing the crime. Remembering that Ned had written a novel about a wartime captain, Daniel suggested that Jane let him keep the manuscript. He also told Neil that both Anthony and the reporter, before their deaths, were investigating the history of World War II. This could be the common thread between the two victims and potentially a breakthrough in the case. If the two murders are indeed related, it could also mean the killer may not have targeted Daniel from the beginning. That day, he attended a funeral for a villager. During the funeral, he took the opportunity to ask Honor about the mural in the old house, learning that it was painted by a French soldier. Before enlisting, this soldier was an artist and had taught French to Bernard and Anthony. After the funeral, Daniel returned home with his mother. A letter from the diocese was slipped through the door crack. Because he had been arrested earlier for participating in a protest that damaged the church's reputation, he was about to face charges of disciplinary violation. Already troubled by this, he was further exhausted by his mother's reproaches. He went back to his study to concentrate on studying Ned's novel and documents related to Anthony. Daniel saw the church map again and began to wonder why Anthony was so particularly interested in the structure of the place. He took out the church map from his work journal and compared it. At first glance, the two maps looked almost identical, but there was actually a very small difference. Daniel's map was a 1726 version, clearly showing a cellar outside the church. Meanwhile, Anthony's map, compiled in 1943, completely lacked this cellar. Daniel immediately called Neil to the church. He suspected the disappearance of the cellar from the 1943 map was intentional. Anthony had mentioned searching for the secret base of the army from years ago, so this could very well be the entrance to the base. They tried checking the most suspicious pulpit in the church, but it didn't budge at all. Neil thought Daniel was overthinking things and didn't believe in such a coincidence. Finally, he gave up and returned to studying Anthony's handwriting. Among the documents, Daniel found a piece of paper with a strange drawing. He immediately thought of the mysterious location recorded in Anthony's notebook. However, when he returned to the cemetery behind the church, he still couldn't turn the valve next to the ancient tomb. The mystery seemed unsolvable. Meanwhile, the police made a new discovery. They checked Anthony's bank history and found that for 6 months, on the same day each month, he went to the same bank to withdraw money, totaling £3,000. Neil suspected Anthony was being blackmailed. Following the bus ticket found on their bodies, they traced it to a bar in town. The owner clearly remembered Anthony because every time he came, he always ordered the same drink and met the same man, around 60 years old, with a beard and a rough appearance. Hearing the description, Neil immediately thought of Edgie. The police quickly arrested him. At his house, they found 2 crucial pieces of evidence: a large sum of money wrapped in a plastic bag and Ned's expensive watch. He was arrested on murder charges, but he didn't argue. He just silently watched his nephew avoid his gaze before letting the police put him in the car. That evening, as Daniel and his mother reminisced, he remembered a childhood incident. Their house had been flooded, and his mother had to run out to find someone to fix the broken kitchen faucet. This detail suddenly gave Daniel a realization. If the secret base was truly inside the church, then the way to open it must be hidden somewhere easily accessible by the villagers. The first thing he thought of was the valve next to the 5 Towers tomb. This time, he didn't try to twist it, but pulled hard. Sure enough, the valve was the key to the base. But where was the entrance? Daniel returned to where Anthony was murdered and compared it with the strange drawing in the notebook. The patterns matched perfectly. He inserted the key into a small hole and turned it sharply. A click sound echoed. The stone slab beneath their feet slowly shifted, revealing a passageway leading down to a dark cellar. Daniel cautiously descended, holding his flashlight. After switching on the power, the light illuminated every corner of the room. Everything seemed to remain unchanged from 44 years ago, only covered in the dust of time. On the floor lay a German military ID card bearing the name Philip. The next morning, Daniel took Neil to the cellar. What aroused their most suspicion was that this place was known only to members of the special organization. So why were German papers here? There was only one possibility. Philip was both a German agent and an insider in the organization. Daniel remembered the captain in Ned's novel. This man had been a double agent who disappeared immediately after the plane crash. Based on all the testimonies and the timeline, Daniel speculated that the captain was Philip. Anthony and Ned were murdered because they had gotten too close to this secret. However, Neil believed that hypothesis was completely unfounded. He believed the gardener's testimony was the key to solving the case, not the cellar or Philip's card. At the police station, Edgie remained silent for a long time after seeing the evidence. Finally, he confessed to the murders. He stated that after discovering Anthony's forgery, he used the secret to blackmail him. Therefore, Anthony had to regularly give him money to keep it a secret. But after Bernard discovered the forgery, Anthony tried to stop everything and even demanded that Edgie return the money he had received. Anthony also threatened to reveal Edgie's past to Bernard, putting him at risk of losing his job at the mansion. Enraged, Edgie followed Anthony to the church and murdered him. Afterward, he discovered Ned writing about his past as a debt collector. Those memories could cause him to be ostracized by the villagers if exposed. Therefore, he murdered Ned as well. He claimed he used a hunting knife to slit the throats of both victims, but this detail made Neil realize he was lying. The murder weapon in Anthony's case was identified as pruning shears, not a hunting knife. Neil understood that Edgie was trying to hide someone very important to him. Meanwhile, Daniel was preparing to meet Bishop. On the way, he recalled the first time Bishop came to his house, when his mother told him many stories about their family's past. Among them was the time their factory failed and faced bankruptcy. At that time, he left to pursue his dream of helping others, leaving behind his desperate father. Ultimately, his father died in grief. In his mother's eyes, he always prioritized becoming a pastor over his responsibilities to his family. He had never truly taken on the responsibility of caring for his relatives, often trying to escape when things got difficult. On the way to town, his mother's words made him think a lot. When confronted by Bishop, he finally understood that perhaps he had left his family to escape, but at the same time, it was also for another purpose. As a pastor, he had witnessed the fear, confusion, and suffering of many people. He could still help them, especially those ostracized and forgotten by society, to know that they were still loved. That day was the village's big horse race. People gathered at the pub to place bets, including Dora. She bet all of their savings, hoping that if they won, they would have enough money to go to Provence. Meanwhile, Nathan was taken to the police station for questioning. Edgie was released because the police lacked sufficient evidence. Before leaving the pub, he happened to meet Stella. Earlier, she had told Daniel about seeing Edgie stalk Anthony and how he had threatened her with a knife to keep quiet. This time, he frightened her again. She went to Dora and Keith to complain that she had been so panicked that Dora needed to stay with her for an hour to calm down. She also suspected that the knife Edgie used to threaten her might be the murder weapon used against Ned. Therefore, she decided to report it to the police. The police asked Nathan why he took Ned's watch. He explained that since the dead man didn't need it anymore, he intended to sell it for money. He insisted he did nothing else. However, Neil had investigated and discovered that before Ned's death, he had carried out a campaign to expose the village's secrets, leading to the arrest of many people, including Nathan's mother. His father had abandoned him and his mother, so he grew up deeply attached to her. After his mother's arrest, he had no choice but to rely on his grandfather, but his hatred never disappeared. Perhaps because he suspected Nathan of killing Ned, Edgie took all the blame upon himself. On the way home, Alex, who had been waiting for Daniel for a long time, worriedly said that Nathan had been arrested, but he was certain Nathan couldn't be the killer. In that prejudiced era, admitting to being gay required immense courage, especially when facing pressure from a powerful family. But now, he didn't care about that anymore. As long as he could save Nathan, he was willing to face anything. The horse race ended with a big win for the horse that many had bet on. Daniel's mother had placed the wrong bet, so she lost all interest. Back home, she and he were still angry about their earlier argument. The atmosphere became awkward, and the conversation quickly ended. Daniel went to his room to prepare his lecture for the next day. As he took out the ink bottle, he suddenly remembered the threatening letters. He checked them carefully and discovered a detail he had previously overlooked. The most recent letter had dark blue ink, while the previous ones had turned completely black over time. Ordinary ink smudges when it comes into contact with water, but the special ink used in the threatening letters was unaffected. This type of ink is usually only used in official documents, and not everyone possesses it. If they could find the person who owned it, they could identify the sender of the letter. Daniel proactively shared his discovery with his mother, helping to mend their relationship. His mother brought him freshly baked cakes and encouraged him. He also confessed that when he talked to Bishop, he realized that his reason for joining the church wasn't simply to prove God's unconditional love. Deeper, he wanted to help others, perhaps partly because he always felt guilty for not being able to help his father. Those words reminded his mother of her deceased husband. She realized that he had always acted on intuition before, but the decision when the factory went bankrupt was one of the few times he didn't follow his intuition. He said it wasn't always right. It had once made him believe that the vault would solve all the mysteries. But in the end, Neil concluded that those clues were meaningless. Encouraged by his mother, he decided to return to the cellar and carefully observe his surroundings. A rat foraging for food drew his attention to the otherwise unremarkable wooden wall. It seemed someone had deliberately used wood to conceal a space behind it. He found a mechanism on a shelf and opened a deeper secret room. Inside, besides a cobweb-covered radio on a table, there was a long, decayed human skeleton. He tried to remain calm and found a piece of paper on the skeleton. The name on it was different from the previous one, but when he compared it to the photo, he confirmed it was the same person, Philip. The only difference was that the new paper was from a special organization. Daniel had guessed correctly. Philip was a double agent. He then discovered a baseball in a basket next to the wall. Inside the slits on the ball, small pieces of paper could be inserted. This was probably how secret agents communicated with each other. Meanwhile, Daniel's mother discovered that, besides him, only Stella in the village possessed this special ink. She angrily went to Stella's house to confront her. After knocking repeatedly without a response, she went in through the back door. Daniel heard the police sirens and rushed to the scene. The area had already been cordoned off. From his mother, he learned about the ink and immediately understood that Stella might be the sender of the threatening letters due to a conflict related to the greenhouse. Neil examined Stella and determined she had died of a heart attack. However, the villagers didn't believe it, as she had always been in good health. Therefore, many suspected the police were simply trying to find an explanation to avoid causing panic. Daniel and his mother also couldn't believe that Stella had suddenly died of a heart attack after 2 consecutive murders. They continued reviewing Anthony's investigation documents and discovered that during his research on war, he had interviewed many elderly people. One person recounted that the Special Operations Bureau had once recruited a young boy to deliver letters on horseback. No one thought a young boy could be involved in the agent's activities. This detail immediately reminded Daniel of a photo Bernard had shown him. In the photo, Bernard as a child was riding a horse and holding a baseball. Perhaps he was the boy from years ago. Alex provided an alibi, clearing Nathan of all charges. However, Nathan was not grateful, understanding that if this were revealed, the whole family would face public scrutiny, especially Alex. He didn't know how to face his strict and high-ranking father, but he was too tired of living in secrecy. Finally, he mustered the courage to come out to his father that he was gay. The only response was a prolonged silence. At the same time, Daniel went to the mansion to see Bernard. Only Honor came forward and hugged him tightly. In that age of prejudice, sometimes just telling the truth required immense courage. Daniel recounted all the clues he had found. Bernard had signed a confidentiality agreement, but after 44 years, the details that needed to be investigated were almost certainly revealed. Therefore, he had no reason to continue concealing the truth. He admitted that as a child he had been a member of the Special Operations Bureau and that he was the one who reported the plane crash. On the night of the tragedy, he had personally seen Philip lurking around the area before the plane exploded. Therefore, the accident that year might not have been a technical malfunction, but rather a deliberate act of sabotage. After releasing Nathan, the police found no further clues. The case stalled again. Neil placed his hopes on the bunker and planned for the investigation team to search it the following day. But Daniel felt uneasy. He realized that he had found so many clues only because the killer didn't know the bunker had been discovered. If the news of the police preparing to search leaked, the killer would certainly become more vigilant and solving the case would become even more difficult. Therefore, he decided to use a plan to lure the killer out. He informed the villagers that the church was about to build toilets and needed to temporarily move the pulpit to install pipes. He believed that if the killer heard this, he would try to return to the cellar to move Philip's body. At night, Daniel waited secretly in the cellar. In 1944, during World War II, Keith and Dora were both members of the Special Operations Bureau. At a dance, Keith fell in love with a French officer at first sight. During their relationship, the officer secretly painted a mural in his old house reserved for her. The woman dancing in the crowd in the painting was her. What helped Daniel decipher the meaning of the painting was an advertisement about Provence, a place Keith had always dreamed of visiting. It included a picture of a monastery that also appeared in the mural. He speculated that this was the French officer's hometown and also where he would later be buried. After a few months of dating, the couple received news from France that a spy had infiltrated the high ranks of the Special Operations Bureau and leaked the plan. The German army then captured and executed most of the members. Keith's girlfriend decided to fly back to France to continue fighting, but that very night, she discovered she was pregnant. Before she could tell the news, she witnessed the plane crash. The future she had dreamed of was snatched away by war, but the war continued, and the child in her womb had to be born. Later, through intelligence information, she learned that Philip was behind the plane crash. She immediately went to his room to find evidence. Unexpectedly, he returned and tried to kill her to cover his tracks. She threw a desk lamp at him, and they struggled violently. When the gun barrel was pointed directly at her, she grabbed the lamp and struck him hard on the head, killing him. To conceal the murder, she had to hide the body in the basement and build a wooden wall to create a secret room, then spread the false rumor that he had escaped. As time passed, memories of the war faded. The secret remained buried for 44 years, until Anthony began researching war history and discovered a cellar beneath the church. Keith feared the past would be exposed and she would spend the rest of her life in prison. Moreover, Dora was terminally ill and didn't have much time left. Keith didn't want her sister's remaining days ruined by judgment, so she took the pruning shears and murdered Anthony. When Ned wrote his novel about Philip, he also discovered that the story of Philip's escape years ago was fake. Keith decided to strike again. She lied, claiming she had found new clues, and lured Ned to near the old house before murdering him. Keith, having been trained in the Special Operations Bureau, found dealing with two ordinary men not too difficult. Neil listened silently to her confession because she had prepared evidence beforehand. If she died, she would become the prime suspect. After confessing to the two murders, she made only one final request: to see Dora one last time. Neil couldn't bring himself to refuse and took her home. Meanwhile, the police discovered that Stella's death wasn't a heart attack. Someone had put a poisonous plant in her tea. Daniel had drunk the tea Keith had given him. But as he was leaving the village, he suddenly remembered a detail from the testimony. Keith said that after hitting Philip with the table lamp, the lamp fell to the ground before she continued to struggle with him. But if that were the case, where did she get the lamp to continue the attack? The truth was, Dora was also worried about Keith that night, so she followed her sister. In the ensuing chaos, it was Dora who picked up the lamp and used it to kill Philip. They committed even more crimes than that. Stella also died at their hands. Earlier, when she was threatened by the gardener, she had asked Dora to stay with her for an hour. But around that same time, Keith murdered Ned. Therefore, Dora had to drive around to create an alibi for Keith. The two stayed together, protecting each other. After being threatened again by Edgie at the pub, Stella declared that she would tell the police everything. If she did, Keith's alibi would be broken. Daniel was about to drink his tea when he noticed something unusual. Their words sounded like they were saying goodbye. He immediately realized the tea might have been poisoned. Keith said his tea was unpoisoned. The poison had only been added to the sisters' teacups. The poison acted very quickly. Even if the ambulance arrived, it would be too late. They only had enough strength left to ask Daniel to pray for them one last time. Memories of the past flashed before their eyes like a slow-motion film. If they could, they would surely want to return to their happiest moments. Like the image in the mural amidst a chaotic era, they could still ignore the world around them and embrace their loved one in despair. But perhaps the current outcome isn't so bad. At least, they still have each other and have been together until the very last moment of their lives. The case is finally closed. The secret buried for 44 years has been brought to light. But that truth also brings with it a series of tragedies that no one can easily accept. After the war, people only remember Keith as a stubborn old woman. Only she understands that for all these years, what she tried to protect was a love that could never be rewritten. Sometimes, confronting the past is necessary, even if it brings pain and chaos. Because it is only by daring to face what has happened that people truly mature. The film ends here. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again.